Hello and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show. I'm your host, Eric Devin, and joining me this fine Thursday evening are Nathan Staples and Adam White. Tonight's jam-packed show will feature brief recaps of the two French teams' involvement in Europe. I'll look forward to the weekend's action, and perhaps most interestingly, our preview of the Champions League group stages as the draw happened earlier today. The Coupe de la Ligue got the week in French football off to an engaging start early Tuesday evening. Auxerre, Clermont, and Sochaux executed relatively routine wins, while Paris FC edged host Lens 7-6 on penalties after a scoreless draw. Stade Lavallois also needed penalties to beat Lyon 4-1, but the real story was the 5-2 pasting of Le Havre by Châteauroux. The round of 32 is set for the last week of October and sees the addition of the Ligue 1 teams who are not involved in European competition. In the Champions League, Monaco hosted Villarreal, and a scoreless draw was enough to see the hosts progress 2-1 in aggregate, the first time a French side has made the group stage by progressing through 2 rounds of playoffs. Saint-Etienne, meanwhile, overcame the dismissal of Stéphane Ruffier just before halftime to earn a scoreless draw against Beitar Jerusalem at home, which likewise sees them into the group stage of the Europa League thanks to a 2-1 aggregate win. So, before getting into the meat of our show, which again today will be the Champions League draw, just wanted to speak with you both about a couple questions surrounding the two matches played today and Tuesday evening. First of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about a player who I was tremendously impressed by on Tuesday night, and that's Timothée Bakayoko, who's recently received a call-up to the under-21 French international squad for their European qualifiers coming up in the next week or two. So, looking at the match, Nathan, you were the one who was over this. What did you think to Bakayoko's performance? I mean, how has his development surprised or impressed you this season so far?
He's really impressed me, and I think this was a culmination really of that in this game. I thought Monaco really controlled the midfield for extended periods, which was an issue in the previous leg, and Bakayoko was an important part of that. I mean, I mentioned in a couple of last week that Bruno Soriano was excellent in the second half, and I expected him to really control the game for Villarreal in this game, but he was pretty quiet, and that's probably in large part to Bakayoko, who's really striving to improve this season as a footballer as he's getting more regular time on the pitch. He's big, he's strong, I think he's very clever positionally as well. He doesn't risk too much at this moment in time. I think he's slowly becoming a really, really good player for Monaco and an important part of their midfield as both a defensive midfielder. And I think at times he's shown the ability to potentially be decent going forward as well with good driving runs. But we'll wait to see how that moves forward. But at the moment, he's really impressed me, and he's definitely one of Monaco's best performers so far this season.
And the other question I had for you as well was, we saw Djibril Sidibe played as a makeshift left back, maybe to no high degree of success. Was this the right move for Leonardo Jardim? I mean, we can obviously say this in hindsight that yes, it paid off, but is that something you'd like to see continue if Mendy does have to miss additional matches?
It's a really difficult one because I don't know personally if someone like Echegile would be good enough to play left back over someone like Sidibe without weakening the team too much. But then again, Raggi was abysmal as well, so it's not. It's a catch-22. We've mentioned this. I would have preferred Fabinho to play right back, Sidibe to play left back in Mundy's absence, and play someone like Jean Moutinho from the start in the middle. I thought Sidibe struggled a little bit to get the ball going forward. He was caught out a little bit too often going backwards. But in the end, like you mentioned, it's sort of paid off in the sense that Monaco still scraped through with that late penalty from Fabinho to make it 1-0. But I was more disappointed by Raggi, to be fair. I thought Raggi was pretty abysmal. He's not good enough going forward as a right back. He's probably not quick enough to defend as a right back either. And it was exposed too often, and against better teams, especially as we'll mention in that Champions League group they've drawn later. Both sides of the fullbacks, if they have issues with Mondi, it may continue.
Yeah, Nathan, you did rightly mention there that it was 1-0, not a scoreless draw for Monaco. It happened just at the end of the match. We had
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
forgotten about it.
I would not blame anyone for missing that. It was an awful game.
All right, so Adam, we'll come on to you. You were watching Saint Etienne's scoreless draw, and it was a scoreless draw, unless they came back on the field. I missed something against Beitar Jerusalem. We saw the team play with sort of a 3-4-3, 3-5-2 hybrid. This is something they had deployed at the weekend against Montpellier to great success. They were able to defeat Montpellier 3-1. The club have a variety of good center backs. We saw the players that played today. That was Pogba, Perrin, and Kevin Teota Catherine. In addition to those two, they also have the youngster Benjamin Karamoko and Pierre-Yves Palomat, who could also play center back. So I think it's a good idea in terms of rotating the center backs and getting them all on the pitch. It also gives more pace in the wide areas, pushing the likes of Malcuit and Dylan Saint-Louis further forward. But the question for me, and this is what I want you to address, Adam, is now the club have 7 central midfielders on their books, all of a league plus quality. Henri Saivet, Jordan Veretout have arrived on loan, and that's in addition to Vincent Pajot, Jeremy Clement, Fabien Lemoine, Brian Dabo, and Ole Selnes. What's Galtier's thinking here with this glut of central midfielders?
I think it's an interesting one. I think with all those central midfielders, I think I've mentioned on the pod before a couple of times that I think their midfield is pretty uninspiring, and with the additions of Henri Saivet and Jordan Veretout, that it's definitely they're both upgrades on those players that they have, like Clement, Pajot, Selnes, who's actually played quite well in the last couple of games, but I still would prefer Saivet or Veretout in there. I have a feeling that by the end of the transfer window, 1 or 2 of those players might move on. Jeremy Clement being the most likely. In terms of the 3-5-2 or the 3-4-3 situation, I think Gautier, he does like it, but in this situation he's kind of been forced into it with both Mbenge and Palomat injured, and he's not too confident that Pogba is playing at left back. So it's a strength that they do have. They have Kelvin Catching's good at centre back, so him, Pogba, and Perrin can all play there, and it makes them something Gautier is very fond of, making them much more defensively solid. They've got that solid base more centrally. But going forward, I think 4-3-3 would probably be the preferred setup, and you probably see Lemon would retain his place. Henri Saivet and Jordan Veretout would probably come in. Veretout definitely, and Selnes has done well in the last few games. So it could be a little bit of a swap around between him and Henri Saivet, but I definitely think they're wise signings. They're league and standard. Veretout was brilliant at Nantes. Saivet was growing into that central midfield position at Bordeaux before he moved on. So I like what he's done there, but I think that big group that you mentioned of midfielders, Medjo and Cornier's in there as well. You might probably see him and Clement at least move on, possibly Pajot as well. But 2 good signings and they're definite upgrades than what they already had. And I imagine that group will dwindle in the next few days before the end of the window.
All right, so well done then to both Monaco and Saint-Etienne. Saint-Etienne will earn themselves a 2nd seed. The draw for the Europa League group stage is tomorrow. And Nice are also in the mix as a 4th seed. So good hopes for Lever to progress, much as they did last season. So concluding our European little recap section, we're going to move now on to our Ligue 1 previews. So we have 4 matches this week. We have Marseille-Lorient, Montpellier versus Rennes, Bordeaux versus Nantes, and the big one, of course, is Monaco hosting PSG on Sunday evening. So we're going to start in chronological order then with Marseille hosting Lorient. No Abu Dhabi Diaby, what a surprise. Henri Bedimo is still injured, so we look for Karim Rekik to start at left back again. So Nathan, I'll come on to you. Is this Marseille's ideal chance to get that monkey off their back, as it will, in terms of finding some level of success at home?
Maybe. It's strange to say ideal because Marseille have been so poor that it's difficult to say anything's ideal for them at the moment. I don't think they want to face an under-7 side on that pitch at the moment with the crowd. Lorient at the moment are one of those teams that don't fill you with any confidence either. I mean, we've already mentioned they've had 3 red cards. Yes, you can argue that the Jeannot one is a strange one that it's difficult to wrap your head around, but he's going to be banned for at least I think I read till September and that could even be a 6-month ban if they decide to extend that. And it's a strange one to say the least. But missing players like Zago Toure, who's very important, and especially someone like Dieng Dong, who's really an integral part of their central midfield. My worry is still that Marseille aren't good enough at the back, though. They were exposed too often at the weekend, especially Sakai, to the pace of Marcus Coco of Guingamp, who was superb. I'm not convinced by their centre-backs, and we know that the goals that they have up front in Benjamin Mukanjo and Majid Waris might be just enough for Lorient to really maybe kickstart their own season. It's such a difficult one to predict. It's going to be, rather than boring, this might be a really interesting game because I think the two are so poor defensively and so porous that they might just both go for it and see what happens. It's such a clash of odd, poor styles that they just need to both try and go out for the win that probably both of them need at this point in the season.
All right, Adam, this game was your pick to preview, and I had somewhat argued against it, seeing that both teams have been somewhat reprehensible so far this season. What are you looking forward to in this match for tomorrow evening?
I think it's two teams that have had pretty terrible starts to the season, and I think somebody's going to come out of this better off. I think it's going to be a really tight game. Part of the reason I was sort of excited about it was because there was a brilliant 5-3 at the Velodrome at the end of Bielsa's reign 2 seasons ago. Jordan Ayew ran riot and Lorient won 5-3. I think it won't be as high scoring this time by any means, but I think there are goals in this game. I think with Nathan mentioned how terrible Olympique Marseille's back four is. It's easily the weakest part of their team. And I think at the pace of Boris Majid and Benjamin Kanjo, Philippotou, Barthelme, if he gets a run, that there could be some joy for Lorient again here. And I kind of fancy them to get a result here. But then at the other end as well, Lorient, their defense isn't great. They've lost Gassama, let him go over the summer. Owen Kofi is not the most defensively minded of right back, shall we say, and very questionable. And there could be joy for Cabela and Gomis there. So I think there's a good potential for goals in this game, and it could be relatively open. So I'm looking forward to it. I think Lorient need something from this game as much as Marseille, because they're one of those teams that worry me. I think perhaps Dijon and Nancy are going to struggle this season, but Lorient aren't too far ahead of them. And although there's that relegation playoff place, Lorient are going to be one of those teams worried about dropping into that third bottom spot. So a win here could be huge for their season. You know, I know it's still Marseille on by any means the force it used to be, but a win at the Velodrome will still be huge confidence-wise, and it could be big for Ripoll, who if they start to go on this run, and perhaps it's only been 2 games, but if they start to lose games in a row and it sort of starts to go downhill, he could be under pressure. So big game for both teams, and hopefully some goals at the Velodrome on Friday night.
All right, with that, what then are your predictions, Adam? I'll start with you.
I'm going to go 2-2.
2-2. Nathan?
I'm going to go 2-0 Lorient.
Okay.
Very good.
I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. Add an ascending off for Lorient. Keep that streak going. So now we'll come on to Montpellier and Stade Rennais, playing in the south of France during the multiplex on Saturday. So Montpellier got a lovely goal from Steve Mounier on last weekend to take an early lead on Saint-Etienne before L'Hiver did come back and win. Talking about this player, is he, and as you had seen the match, Adam, is he another sort of diamond in the rough? Montpellier seem to have been digging these out in the past few seasons, whether it's Casimir Ninga last season, Lucas Barrios 2 years ago. Is he the type of player who can be that outlet for Montpellier to be as devastating on the counterattack as they sometimes showed last season?
I think they would certainly hope so. He was good on loan at Nîmes last season, and I think he's the type of player that they need. They've got pace in their team, and he just adds to that pace. So if they're going to play on the counterattack, they would be looking for him to make a real impact in that area of the side. I'm not entirely sure about whether he's going to get enough goals to sort of that kind of league and striker where they're effective in one regard, perhaps they run the channels well, they don't get too many chances, but they don't score enough goals, he may end up falling into that category. If he starts every game, you'd hope he'd get double figures, which in this league is good, but I'm still unconvinced whether finishing is his, it being only 21, of course, whether it's something that he's a natural finisher, and that would be a huge asset for Montpellier going forward, especially if they keep Riyad Boudebouz. I mean, he's going to get more chances than most, and he's still an upgrade on players like Berragu and Simon Kamara, but whether he's going to be prolific enough to sort of keep them in where they want to be, like upper mid-table at least, is another question. But a good start for him in the last few games, so I look forward to seeing how he progresses over the course of the season.
All right, Nathan, I'll come on to you talking about Rennes. So we saw the team playing sort of a 4-4-1-1. Johan Gorkoop is sort of the static playmaker to allow the wide players and the forward ahead of him to run about, whereas he can sort of function as a fulcrum of the offense. This looked really promising, but against Nancy, we need to take this with a grain of salt. So I guess I have a two-part question for you. Is this a look that Rennes should continue with? And secondly, if Montpellier persists with this 4-4-1-1, does Paul-Georges Ntep have a role with the club, or should he not figure given his injury history?
It's a little bit difficult. I'll go with the first one about Johan Gorkoop, who was good at the weekend, I thought, and you're right. Against Nancy, he seemed to find a lot of space. So with one result, you have to take it with that pinch of salt that you can't say for definite that it's the right move to make. I really like him in that role, to be fair. He's not, with the amount of injuries he's had in the past, he's not as dynamic as he used to be, and playing as that static playmaker in behind the striker, it's a position that allows him to try and find the space without having to move out of an attacking area and allow himself to be that creative goal-scoring midfielder that we saw in the past, and displayed by his lovely goal as well. For the second part, for Ntep, I think you try and have to find a role for Ntep in this squad because he's too good on form not to. He's probably Rennes' most naturally talented footballer, and he's probably, if on full form, he could be their top scorer as well. I can't imagine him not playing. But like you say, in that 4-4-1-1 that Christian Gorkouf started with, is there a role in him there? I'm not 100% certain. Not out wide anyway, because he's not. He does like to be further forward rather than track back, and he is much more dangerous in that final third than he is tracking back too often. So it's a question for Gorkouf as manager to try and fix that. Whether he goes and pushes another winger further forward and goes 4-2-3-1, maybe that's a decision, but is that maybe leaving the defence too exposed? Although they are playing more defensive midfielders in that central area, so it's a tough question. I would absolutely play Ntep if he's fit, as long as he's 100% fit, and you know that I wouldn't play him if he's 99% fit because it's not worth it now. You need to make sure that he's fully fit before you put him on that field again, because Rennes can't afford to keep having him on the sidelines and staggering his development anymore, because it's going to adversely affect his career. So if he's 100% fit, he has to start for me.
All right. So Ntep, by the way, is expected back after the international break, along with Camille Grosicki, who's also currently injured. So with that, then we can get some predictions. Then Nathan, I'll come to you first.
I was disappointed by Montpellier in the second half against Saint-Etienne. I think they folded a bit, and they look a little bit heavily reliant on Riyad Boudebouz, who was utterly fantastic again. So I'm going to go 3-1 Rennes.
Okay, and Adam, for you?
I think we'll go for a cagey 1-1 draw.
Okay. I'm going to go 1-0 for Rennes, a road winner, or 0-1, I should say. I think that again, I sort of have to agree there that there's not really a lot to look at in terms of a positive way in Rennes' style of play, in Montpellier's style of play, aside from the superb Boudebouz. So coming on now to Sunday's early afternoon match. That's Girondins de Bordeaux, who are hosting FC Nantes. So as we mentioned in the recent past, particularly on Monday's GFFN show, we talked in our worry section about how Bordeaux worry me. They have the league's worst defense, bar none, 6 goals conceded in 2 matches. So what I wanted to ask is, Adam, I'll come on to you first. Could this be, if this is a disaster performance, say not hit them for 3 or 4, could this be the beginning of the end for the goodwill that Gourvenec has in terms of a bad result?
Possibly. It's an interesting question because I feel like it is still relatively early. I mean, you're absolutely right. They do have the worst defense in the league, and they were pretty poor defensively against Toulouse last week. Toulouse were very good, and Martin Braithwaite had a fantastic game, but Bordeaux were very open at the back. I think Gorkov has proved, at least to some extent, that this Bordeaux side is a sort of a step up, at least an evolution of the Sagnol / Ulrich Rame side with the opening game against Saint-Etienne when they were brilliant for an hour, 70 minutes or so. So it's almost been like one great performance or 70 minutes worth of a great performance and then one terrible performance. So even though they look open at the back, they also, like, on their day at home especially, they're going to score goals. So I'd hope that unless they really go, because obviously this is a derby as well, so Bordeaux, the fans aren't going to want to see them be hit for 3 or 4 again. But unless they get torn apart, I think Gourvenec's got a little bit longer in terms of his sort of honeymoon period as a manager, because I think he's proven to the fans that he has attacking intent, that he's trying to make his team play the right way, and with the signings of Toulon and Menes, there's a lot of potential. And I was lucky enough to go to Bordeaux and meet some of the fans the last season, and they were very sort of down on the Sagnol situation. And I think they would be really pleased with the more open style of football, which he definitely offers. So unless they get torn apart by Nantes this weekend, which I don't foresee, I think it's going to be a pretty close game. Perhaps Bordeaux even slightly more favourites. Get Unas back from the start. I think hopefully last week would be a little more than a blip for Gourvenec, and he'll have a lot more to offer as the season goes on. Because as we've discussed before, they're an exciting team, and I think there could be an asset to the league and a good advert for the league. It's a little bit of a cliche, but it could be true with the players they've got at hand and that attacking 4-4-2. So if they don't really get torn apart, I think Gourvenec's got a long way to go before the fans get too much on his back.
All right, so Nathan, I come on to you then. This is a derby match, and Nantes have definitively set out their stall in somewhat of an uncharacteristic way for René Girard, as being quite a bit more of an attacking team. The likes of new signing Nikolai Thompson, Amin Hari, Adrian Thomason, who've been at the club before. Jules Aloki is injured, so they're going to be somewhat lacking in width in terms of that 4-3-3 that he's deployed so far. But could this be a match that could really kickstart Nantes' season if they can go away to Bordeaux and score a couple goals and give a good account of themselves, maybe even regardless of the result?
Yeah, if they can get a win here, that can be. They need a little bit of a lift. Last weekend when they played Monaco was a real disappointment when you looked at Monaco's team sheet. I mean, credit to Leonardo Jardim for using the depth of his squad, but Nantes should have looked at that team, should have looked at that fixture with Monaco facing a Champions League game on Tuesday and said, well, we'll go for this, and they didn't. They were restricted by a solid Monaco team, but mainly full of their second string players, really, which is a bit of a shame, and I would like to see how they will recover from that confidence-wise, because they had a okay opening game where they showed some attacking intent and got the win eventually, even though it was only 1-0. They need to try and be more inventive. I think in the last game they had 8 shots, but only 2 on target, which shows you clearly enough, and you could see from the highlights that a lot of their attempts were from outside of the box. They need to try and penetrate a little bit more, and that might be an option against Bordeaux with that leaky defence they have at the moment. I'm going to safely assume that they'll probably play Kacaniklic instead of Aloki with him injured. So they're keeping they look like they will keep their width, but it's a tough one. They've not shown enough yet, I don't think, to say that they're going to score plenty of goals. But there's no doubt that if they can, and especially if they score early, if they get off to a good start and grab a goal and knock Bordeaux a little bit, which seems to be the main thing, and attack them with pace, which was the real problem against Toulouse as well, obviously with Martin Braithwaite and the rest getting in behind them, and then forcing them to make soft, sloppy mistakes. Yeah, they might have some success there, but they need to get off to a good start.
All right, we'll get score predictions, and this is actually a match I'm really looking forward to. I think there could be a lot of goals in this, but I'll save my prediction for last. Diplomatic host that I am. Adam, I'll come to you first.
2-1 Bordeaux.
Okay, Nathan?
I'm going to go for a 1-0 Bordeaux.
All right, and I'm going to go for 2-3, not with the winner. A big scoring match here. So we come on now to the last match of the weekend. That is PSG's visit to Monaco. Adam, we'll come on to you first. If there's an ideal time to play Monaco, is this it?
I think it probably is. I think getting into the Champions League is massive for the club, as it is for all of those teams who are in that sort of that playoff round for the Champions League. Getting the difference between being a Champions League side and a Europa League side, especially for a club like Monaco, given their backing and their aspirations. I think that's kind of they've got to achieve one of their main early season goal now. So given that they kind of put a lot of effort into qualifying, they had 2 rounds, as you said, they were the first team to qualify for France into the group stage, having qualified for 2 rounds. So difficult away trips. I didn't necessarily fancy them before they played Villarreal. I thought it was going to be a tough game. 2 really intense ties. Bearing in mind PSG have had the full week to prepare for this game. As is always the case in Ligue 1, you have to have PSG favourites, but perhaps slightly more so coming into this game, given that Monaco put so much into their Champions League campaign, and justifiably so. I mean, if you're Jardim, that's exactly what pretty much every manager would do. That's an important early season goal. They've got the rest of the league and season to rectify anything that goes wrong in the first 2 or 3 weeks. So it's going to be a very good time, given that they've had all those extra games, and PSG have had even when they played last week, they even had they played on Sunday, didn't they? So they've had a full week to prepare. So I would say perfect time to play them from Emery's point of view.
Nathan, I'll come on to you. We've seen PSG look impressive, particularly in defense, but there are still some questions surrounding the form of Edson Cavani and of Hatem Ben Arfa. So a 2-part question for you. 1 is, do PSG need another center forward? 2, if PSG struggle in this match, maybe say a scoreless draw, or even if they lose, I'm not saying it's a matter of his job or anything, but could there be subtle ramifications for the credentials of Emery going forward?
It's an interesting one. I'll tackle that first one first. Obviously, you mentioned they do need another striker. I think it's pretty clear. Edison Cavani was, frankly, awful. Probably is the best way to.
He was so bad.
Yeah, he was. I could have put my dad up front, and he's heading into his 60s, and he might have scored one of those chances. Especially that one in the second half where he's so close to the goal and he still misses. I couldn't believe how bad he was at points in that game, and it's such a disappointing thing to see because he needed to set out his stall early if he wanted to be. It's his time to be the man, and he didn't stand up in that game. So if he starts in this one, which he probably will, barring any miraculous movement from Unai Emery, he needs to prove it in this one and not just score but be impressive and get in those positions, because like you mentioned on the show on Monday, Eric, it's not the positions that's been the problem. He gets in those, it's scoring, and he needs to find that again. Otherwise they do need to bring someone in, but who they bring in is the big question. You bring in someone who's a big name, like it's unlikely now because he's mentioned he's going to stay at Everton, but Romelu Lukaku or someone like that, or do you go for a younger striker to play behind him to just add a little bit of pressure? It's difficult, especially with such a short window to go. It's difficult to say that they're going to do anything about that. But as for Unai Emery's credentials, yes, they will be questioned if they have a poor result in this one, because these weren't issues, especially in Ligue 1 anyway, that Laurent Blanc was facing too often, because yes, they win 3-0 against Metz in the end, but for long periods of that game, it was strange because like I mentioned on Monday's show, they've changed their style slightly to play the likes of Lucas and Di Maria slightly more infield this season, and allowing them to move into even the centre attacking midfield roles and exploring those areas. So Lucas gets into the box occasionally, and occasionally Angel Di Maria takes that position where Pastore is, and they just allow the fullbacks to almost act like wing backs, so they're that far forward. You see Kazawa pop up in the box more often than not. He scored again because he pops up in the box because he's so advanced. But they have to question it, because if they keep playing like this and struggle to get strong results, it begins to set that panic in that they can't do it in the Champions League. And I'm interested to see what he does tactically in the Champions League, whether he reflects back to something like the counter-attacking football we saw at Sevilla and a bit more solidity, or whether he does try and do this really, at times, hyper-attacking football where you're almost having 6, and if you add Rabiot into there, who's cutting into the space, maybe even 7 advanced forward into the final third, which is it's an interesting idea to try and add more bodies in there, but they're still trying to pass round teams too often, I think, and not penetrating through runs and with the ball. And there has to be questions if he doesn't get a result here, because this is a big statement game. If they beat Monaco, then that's one title challenger potentially, given a little bit of a body blow early on. So yeah, he needs a result here. I think not desperately, but just to give him a little boost to get a result here. Yeah, it would be good.
All right, then Nathan, I'll get your prediction before we move on to the Champions League draw.
I don't like the look of Monaco, and I think tiredness will take a big play because Villarreal made them work a little bit in midweek. So I'm going to go 2-0 PSG.
Okay. Adam, for you?
4-1 PSG.
All right. Let's see. I will take 3-1. A reflection of, I believe they played that score fixture around this time last year. That was Kurzawa's last match for Kurzawa and Martial's last match for Monaco last year, if I remember correctly. So now we are going to move on to our Champions League preview. Just take about 5 minutes or so on each group. I'll get your impressions, initial reactions for each of them, and then you'll give me where you think the French side will finish, and along with who the qualifiers from each group will be. So, Adam, I'll come on to you first. We got Group A. PSG are a top seed alongside Arsenal, FC Basel, and Ludogorets.
It's an interesting group. I think it's kind of perfect for PSG in terms of their qualification. I think what's important for them would be winning the group. Last year, Real Madrid won the group. All right, PSG got through their first round knockout tie. But even so, winning the group in these situations is really important. So I think they're favourites for this group. I think Arsenal provide them with a test, but I think out of those two sides, PSG are the favourite, the better of the two, even without Zlatan in the Champions League, who, quite frankly, especially in the bigger games in the Champions League, didn't show up last year. So I think the addition of Emery is going to be really important, because I think he's a lot more streetwise in European terms. So given that he's won Europa League 3 years in a row with Sevilla, which is an incredible achievement, it's the reason that they hired him. I think PSG are going to be better in the Champions League this year. They're going to be far more aware of their opponents, far more sort of dynamic, perhaps, in the way they go about approaching games. Whereas under Laurent Blanc, they were perhaps a bit predictable, perhaps a bit stale, perhaps a bit no evolution. There was no tactical sort of awareness from Blanc's point of view. So I think for PSG, they're going to be better. Perhaps not as good in Ligue 1, because maybe Lyon and Monaco will be close to them this year. But we can expect good big things from PSG, I think, in the Champions League, and this is a perfect group for them. So Arsenal, give them a test. Those games will be exciting. They'll be close. They're big ties, but I expect PSG to win them. They're a good sort of laying down their marker sort of thing for the bigger games to come. If they can beat us and do it comfortably, which I'd fancy them to do. Basel are a good team to face, because away from home, Basel. Well, if you go to Basel, they're a tough proposition. They've knocked. I remember knocking English sides out. They've done really well at home in recent seasons, going back 5, even 10 years. They're a tough proposition. So that would be a good test for PSG to go to Switzerland and overcome that challenge. Ludogorets possibly a bit also runs in the group. Perhaps PSG might have hoped for someone a little bit more competitive. At least I did as someone who's been watching all those games. But I think PSG win this group and they can aim for 18 points. I think that they should win this group and do so comfortably. Hopefully, standing them in good stead for the later rounds, playing a second place team, which would be a weaker tie. Hopefully, you would imagine. So, good draw for them, I think, overall.
Yeah, unless it's Atletico Madrid, right?
Yeah, exactly. Them or Bayern wouldn't be fun, but still.
Yeah. So Nathan, I'll come on to you. What are your initial thoughts on Group A?
It's Adam's already touched on it a lot. It's a relatively straightforward group, I would think, for PSG. It's not the most complex group. I don't think Arsenal look particularly strong this season, although I expect them to grow as in the next couple of weeks as they sort of settle down and the murmurs stop going around once they've won a couple of games. They'll still be a difficult proposition, especially at home where they tend to turn it on in the Champions League. So let's not assume that that's an incredibly easy tie, but I still think, especially at the Parc des Princes, they should be beating them. Basel, an interesting team at least. I think people are maybe writing them off a little bit easily because they had a relatively good summer where they brought in Serie D from Stuttgart. They've got Seydou Doumbia up front on loan, and they've got Birkir Bignansson who impressed in the European Championships as well. He's part of their squad. He's been there for a couple of years. So is Tolant Xhaka, Mark Yanko as well. So they've got some reasonable players there. And like Adam mentioned, they've been excellent at home in Europe recently. They've been excellent against English teams as well and shown their strength. So they aren't going to be the easiest team to necessarily go through, but Ludogorets is one of those relatively simple ties you would imagine. No offense to them, but it's relatively straightforward. They'll be relatively pleased that as well, travel-wise, that it's not too difficult. I mean, Ludogorets is probably the furthest away, but travels to Switzerland and England aren't exceptionally strenuous compared to a trip to, say, Moscow or Turkey or something like that. So, yeah, they can be really happy with what they've drawn, and they should be absolutely aiming for a maximum points if they can.
All right, so we're probably agree then. PSG top, Arsenal second, Basel third, Ludogorets fourth.
Yeah, that's the consensus, I would think.
I think Basel could run Arsenal maybe too close for comfort, something along the lines of Olympiacos last season, but I think the Gunners ultimately have enough to go through. I saw today that they're on the verge of or have signed Lucas from Deportivo La Coruña, who's been really impressive for that club in Spain over the last couple of years. So a little bit of bolstering the front line there. So we're moving on now to Group E. We have CSKA Moscow, or the top seed, as the 8th place champion. We also have Bayer Leverkusen, Tottenham Hotspur, and our 4th seed is our good friends from the south of France, or very near the south of France, Monaco. Adam, your initial thoughts on this group?
I really like this group. I think, given the new Champions League style of draw, where the top 8 coefficient leagues the winners get seeded, it opens up to this type of group. So I think this is a really, really exciting group because every team will fancy their chances of winning, but equally any team in this group could finish bottom. I think it's a very open and even group. For Monaco, they'll be really pleased to get it because, given that they oddly slipped into the bottom pot out of the 4 for the draw, they would have been fearing the worst with that we talked about the Atletico Madrid Bayern Munich group, which would have been very difficult to get out of. So they've avoided the really tough teams. So Monaco will be really pleased with this. They'll be looking forward to some competitive games, and they'll fancy their chance of getting through. And I think they've got a very good chance of making the knockout stage, which would be not only great for them but really good for French football. So you have imagined at least 2 teams going through if they can pull that off. Did brilliantly in Villarreal, tough team as we said before, a difficult place to go, and they've sort of we talked about PSG laying down a mark, and Monaco have perhaps done it in their own slightly less noticeable way, but still important. They've gone to a difficult European team and they've won. They've made it through. So that will stand them in really good stead for trips to White Hart Lane and to the Bayer Arena. So they're tight games. I think Spurs will be an interesting proposition for Monaco. They played each other in Europa League recently as well. It was a close game, but I think depending on how Pochettino and his squad adapt to Champions League football, Monaco, that's a very open game and very difficult to call. While Leverkusen are a tough proposition, they always do relatively well in Champions League. They're always quite competitive. Javier Hernandez on form for them will be a tough proposition. Balarabi and Kevin Campbell in the midfield, the Bender brothers. Charles Aranguiz was a fantastic player, has been for a long time, struggled with injury though, but if they can get him on form, they're a very tough proposition. So I think those three teams especially will be so evenly matched that we're in for a really exciting group stages with them. CSKA Moscow, obviously, Russia and Eastern Europe in general is renowned for being a difficult place to go, and that'll be their strength as well, but they're a very good team. Russian champions, of course. So all four teams, relatively even matched. Open group. Monaco would be very happy to not get any of the big sides, and they'll fancy their chances in this group. It should be fun.
Yeah, shades of 2 years ago, perhaps, for Monaco when they topped the group with Zenit and
Benfica.
Zenit, Benfica, and there's a German team in there as well. Was it Bayer?
I think it might have been, yeah.
Yeah. Nathan, what are your thoughts on Group E?
I like this group, but I'm a little bit less positive about it for Monaco, really, in all honesty. They're three awkward, tough teams, really. It's going to be interesting, like we've already mentioned, to see how Tottenham will affect to the Champions League. Obviously, they're playing at Wembley now as well for these games, so that adds to the interesting factor of it. So you have to take that into play that they're not really playing at home necessarily. So that'll be interesting. Whether they can adapt to that will be an interesting fact. CSKA are an interesting team as always. They've lost a couple of players. They've gained a couple of players. It's always difficult to judge exactly where they will be in European competitions, but they're not enormously far off where they were last season, and they were relatively tough in some games and relatively awful in others. So I fancy them to probably finish at bottom, but Bayer Leverkusen are a really good team, and they've added a lot of players this summer, like Baumgartlinger from Mainz, and they've brought in Kevin Volland from Hoffenheim, a couple of good young players into this squad as well. I think they're on the verge of buying Dragovic as well, the central defender. So they've got a really good, solid squad mixed with youth, like the upcoming Julian Brandt, who's super at the last third of last season. He was absolutely on fire. Hakan Çalhanoğlu is a really dangerous player. Kalim Bellarabi is a really fantastic player. One of my favourite players of all time. The good old Stefan Kiesling's still there, so his aerial threat might be a problem for some teams, especially in the later stages. But this is a really tough one for Monaco. I think they've not got enough. I think they might just miss out with Spurs and Bayer. But at the same time, they have nothing to fear in this group. So they should go out there and try their best, keep that stern line like they did last time they were in the Champions League group stages, try and nick a goal in some games. And if they can keep a good homestead, they've got every chance. That's the big thing in the Champions League. Make sure you defend your home advantage. If they can do that, then they've got a chance. But I do worry that they might not quite make it out.
All right, I would tend to agree with you there, Nathan. I'd say Bayer to top the group, Spurs to follow, Monaco dropping to the Europa League, unfortunately. Adam, your prediction?
I think I don't fancy Spurs. Last couple of seasons in Europa League they haven't performed as you might expect. Champions League step up, all right, they're playing similar level teams as they did in the later rounds, but I'm not sure that they're going to adapt to the Champions League particularly well, whether their style will translate well to European football. So I think there might be it's not really an upset, but maybe Monaco might sneak through in second, very close to Bayer Leverkusen, Spurs in third.
Yeah, right. I'm agreeing with yours, Eric. So yeah, it would be that Bayer, Spurs, Monaco.
Moving on now to Group H, the home of my team, Lyon. Have been handed probably the toughest draw of any of the three French sides. They're in with Italian champions and buying every player in Italy juggernaut Juventus, Unai Emery's former team, Sevilla, although they're a little bit different than when he last saw them, and as well as Dinamo Zagreb, who Leon may remember from that infamous, as if you may, 7-1 a few years ago when they beat the Croatian team to go through in second place. So we'll come on to you first, Adam. Your thoughts on Group H.
It's an interesting one. As you said, it's probably the hardest of the of the three French teams tasked looking ahead, Dynamo Zagreb caused Arsenal some problems last season. Juventus, look, I think when Pogba moved from Juventus to United, Max Allegri said like he's got to be careful what he does here because given Juventus signings in their squad as it looks now, Juventus are one of the top 4 sides in Europe in obviously their manager's opinion, which is easily biased, but it's a good point. They're a very, very strong team, and with Gonzalo Higuain there, he was incredible at times for Napoli last season, broke the Serie A goal scoring record. I think from their point of view, that losing Pogba and getting Higuain is almost an upgrade. Pogba's a world class player, but Higuain might be that extra sort of goal scoring factor they need to really challenge this year. Obviously, they've been in the final recently, but they'll be a real threat. Sevilla are a really interesting side. Much change, as you said. They've won the Europa League last 3 years, as I mentioned before, as everybody knows. But they've had a large overhaul in players. With like Wassim Ben Yedder, it'll be interesting to see how he does in the Champions League. We have a futsal background at Toulouse. He was one of my favourite players in the league, and it's interesting to see how he adapts to the bigger stage. Luciano Vietto in that side, I thought was brilliant at Villarreal. Very, very, very sort of clever finisher that used space really well, nipped in and was very, very, very effective. Not so much at Atletico Madrid, but be interesting to see how he does. Ganso's finally got his European move to Sevilla from Sao Paulo after he came through with Neymar at Santos and was meant to be the next big number 10 for Brazil. Didn't really work out for him. In and out with injury, very unreliable. Perhaps hasn't got the pace, maybe. But it'd be really interesting to see how he does. Hiroshi Kiyotaki coming in from Germany. They're a really interesting team, but they've had a big overhaul. So they've lost Kevin Gamero and Ever Banega, and I don't know that this team, although Sampaoli is going to be incredible to watch. That 6-4 at the weekend with Espanyol was fantastic. But whether they're going to adapt to European football, whether Sampaoli is going to be able to adapt quickly, because obviously he's not been in the Champions League recently. So I think for Lyon, it's not as bad as it looks on paper. I think them and Sevilla are relatively well matched given the turnover and obviously the manager's moved as well. So I think Lyon won't be too upset. I think the games between them and Sevilla will be the key ones, and especially at the Francis Pizjuan, that'll be the key game, and they'll be looking at that as a game they need to come out with without defeat, assuming they can get 6 points from Dynamo Zagreb, which isn't going to be easy either. So yes, difficult task, but I think Lyon have fancied their chances too.
Nathan?
I agree with a lot of what Adam's already mentioned. I mean, it's not an easy group, put it that way. But I will make a minorly controversial point at the moment where I don't think, watching a bit of Juventus at the weekend, I don't think they're necessarily better than they were last season. I think Allegri's maybe hyping his side a little bit up because they at times against Fiorentina, they looked a bit lackluster and a bit devoid of ideas, but they're obviously missing a couple of players still, and they're looking to. I think they're still looking to bring Cuadrado back into the club, and that will help. But I'm not entirely convinced they're going to blow people away necessarily. But they're so good defensively at times that I still see them winning the group. That Sevilla result of the weekend was what a game that was. And Adam's already mentioned all the fantastic talent they've brought in, and the real positive for them is they all the big ones scored at the weekend. I mean, Vietto got 2, Franco Vasquez, who they got from Palermo, he scored 1. Ben Yedder grabbed 1, Hiroshi Kiyotaki grabbed 1. So they've had all their attacking talent that they've brought in all score, which will give them that little bit of a boost that they need. But they're going to be really interesting in Jorge Sampaoli. I don't think they're going to be the most solid defensively, but by the way, I am looking forward to that game between Sevilla and Lyon, between Lacazette, Fekir and Cornet versus Vietto, Franco Vasquez, Ben Yedder, Kiyotaki. That's not even adding like Konoplyanka. Oh, that might be a humdinger of a game with Jorge Sampaoli as well. But Zagreb are a bit of a challenge, especially in Croatia. They're not always going to be the easiest game. They'll always have they seem to have a consistent conveyor belt of talent. So we'll see the other players that they're springing out when they play again, and they're always an interesting team to look out for because they're not going to be a walk in the park. But it's going to come, like Adam's already mentioned, it's coming down to that Lyon-Sevilla doubleheader and whether Lyon have enough to go and do it. I'm I think they might just have enough, but it's going to be very close.
All right, I will agree with you, Nathan, but maybe there's a little bit of bias included in there. Adam, would you favor Sevilla or Leon to progress?
Oh, it's so tight, isn't it? That Nathan's right. That game is going to be fantastic. I look forward to it a lot. I'm going to say not quite. I think they've got a huge chance. It's like 51-49 for me, but just Sevilla, I think, over the course of the group. Leon might get out of the might get some decent play in both those games, but over the course of the group, Sevilla just possibly on goal difference or head to head or something like that. Could be very close.
Certainly, the physicality of Sevilla's midfield gives me some pause with Iborra and Zanzi and the likes of those players in there. But that is unfortunately all we have time for today. Thanks for listening. This has been the Get French Football News preview show. We will be back at 8 o'clock British Standard Time. For more football news from France, you can follow us at GFFN or visit us online at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com. Thanks for tuning in. I've been Eric Devin, joined by Adam White and Nathan Staples. Thank you and have a pleasant rest of your evening. The Europa League draw is tomorrow. We'll get to find out who Saint-Etienne and Nice are facing.